And now I'd like to introduce our presenters, Luke McNamara and Doug Wilson. Welcome.
All right. Well, we're continuing the fireside chat format here in our first breakout session. Joining me and actually really doing the bulk of this, and the reason why you were probably here in this room, Doug Wilson, security leader at Anthropic, over 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity, and I think maybe most importantly for this audience, former Mandiant.
Yep. Been a while, but I see some familiar faces out in the crowd, both in here and out walking around. So hello, everyone.
So I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about, I think, a number of different aspects of AI, what you're seeing as someone at a frontier AI lab, how it's shaping the offensive, defensive balance of power, how adversaries are adopting it, how security practitioners can adopt it. But I thought it might be interesting to begin with a little bit about threat modeling, because this is a very nascent industry. There's not many. There's a very short list of organizations at the Anthropic level that are really building out this technology. And I would imagine the sort of threats that you have to consider, you have your typical extortion threat actors that everyone who's connected to the internet has to think about. You have the big four, probably beyond the big four that you have to consider from an espionage standpoint. But then there's other aspects of the technology itself. So maybe we'll get started with that. Sort of how do you think about threat modeling at a frontier AI lab?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do is we do what is done traditionally in the industry, and then we have to add a lot more because of the weird world that we've gotten into with AI. So we think about a lot of the classic cyber threats, such as you pointed, like attacks on our infrastructure, people trying to steal things, exfiltrate data. But then we're also worried about emergent capabilities of the models as they grow, alignment problems, how the models can be abused. And I think the big one that is coming on the horizon for everybody in the next year or so is what happens with agentic AI behavior. We've already started seeing enough interesting and new challenges with humans starting to leverage AI. We're now having AI-powered workflows. So honestly, one thing we do there is we get a lot more of the company involved in just classic cybersecurity. We don't really have that distinction of like, there's just a security team and they worry about security at Anthropic. We have an organization of people that are crafting the model from the initial creation of data and the training all the way through. And there's people who are worried about, as I said, like model alignment. There's people who are worried about the safeguards and trust and safety aspects of it. So we take the traditional cybersecurity threat modeling that you would normally do, and we add all these additional layers on top of that. And it's not any one team's responsibility. So,
excellent. So let's talk a little bit about how adversaries are adopting this, and maybe to begin with, sort of, we've seen at this point, I think several kind of iterations of public research. Certainly at Google, we put out some around how we've seen actors try to abuse and misuse Gemini. I think we've seen similar from Anthropic, other security companies, and AI labs. With what we have seen to date, how would you characterize where we are on sort of the adoption curve of AI by adversaries?
Yeah, I think adoption is here. I think adoption is full-throated and happening across the industry. And yeah, this is a very valid point, is it's not any one particular model. It's not any one particular type of model. It's not frontier or open weights. But we've seen reports from you all, from OpenAI. We've published a couple ourselves. I think our first one is March. We've now published one in August. We're seeing adversaries working it into every part of their workflow that they can. So some of the things that we have seen creation of ransomware, we have seen extortion things, we have seen exploitation, like what you would traditionally assume for a pen tester would do. And we're starting to see more and more of these workflows outsourced to the AI. So what we thought we would see early on is we thought we would see humans who were using, and we did see this early on, is we would see using AI as an advisor. And now what we're starting to see is delegation of workflow. So instead of being like, hey, how do I hack into this thing and getting some information, you can take an agentic coding harness and you can use this, actually step through the bits of the process and hand off pieces in a way that you couldn't before. So,
and do you think it's something where, there's obviously a lot of experimentation that's going on. I think this is something that we've seen. I think if you look at some of the use cases by specific actors, I'll point out, like, for example, APT42 from Iran. Some of the types of activity they were doing in the past, like targeting of high-value targets, credential collection, they're kind of using that in their workflow. So the same types of attacks or techniques, but now leveraging that. Are you seeing things like that where it's experimentation of how do I add this to my existing workflow? Or is it sort of experimentation with kind of newer types of techniques and attacks, doing something maybe a little bit different than adversaries have done before?
I think it's mostly things that we've seen before, but it's things where, so one of the things that is changing is that the level of sophistication of the adversary no longer is represented in their output. So I don't think we're seeing anyone who's found a way to like do something you've never seen before with AI. I don't think we're in the, well, actually, we talk about vulnerabilities later, but we're seeing a lot of cases where it is obvious that the person who is trying to do the hostile actions does not have a certain level of skill, and they are now able to lean on the AI to close that gap. So I think we will see truly novel things down the road, but I think the big difference you're seeing is people who have enough knowledge to know that they want to do something dastardly or problematic to an organization are now able to work with an AI agent and be able to up-level themselves. And then the adversaries who already know what they're doing are not so much concerned about up-leveling as scaling. So previously, one of the things we would cite about an APT is the amount of staffing and resources that goes into an operation that is funded by a nation state. Like there's just an immense amount of resources going into that. I think that picture is changing. And so I think you have people who are less skilled who are upskilling themselves, and you have people who are more skilled who are scaling themselves. So,
how do you think about that problem of like classes of adversary that are able to kind of leverage this for types of attacks that they couldn't do previously? Because I think this is something we see, I think, in other areas of the cyber threat landscape that aren't necessarily driven by AI. So I think like some of the phishing as a service or any of the as a service offerings that we see, those aren't necessarily being driven by AI, but it's something that as a resource, actors can go out and purchase this or leverage this in some way. I think we called it out actually in our forecast report of last year, the sort of democratizing of cyber capabilities. So any sort of thoughts around kind of how AI plays into this, what's probably a larger trend?
I mean, I think it's just as you said, like it's making it more available to people. So, I mean, I feel this is jumping ahead to some other parts of the conversation, but I feel whoever is using it to innovate is going to accelerate what they're doing. It's a technology that often makes things go faster. It makes things more available. So, I mean, I think we have seen it in our intelligence report, specifically in August. I think we mentioned we have seen it in phishing and influence campaigns. So I don't think there's a sector that you could say people aren't leveraging it yet. I think there's just places we don't know they're leveraging it yet. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think so. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about model selection. Yep. So Sandra, in one of the keynote sessions, referenced some of the research we've done looking at actors in the underground, some of the models for sale or some of the services that are being offered off of these illicit AI models. And these are models, unlike Claude or Gemini, that probably don't have the same guardrails and safety controls. And so that's why actors are interested in experimenting with them. What are you seeing, or what do you think we will see around this sort of adoption? Because there are drawbacks from the adversary perspective to certainly using these that maybe don't have the full-fledged capability of some of these foundational AI models. I think it was also talked about earlier, when we saw, I believe it was APT28, leveraging Quen earlier in some other operations. Like, is that also another trend that we might see of actors favoring models that are coming from non-Western companies? So kind of a large kind of question here, but around model selection by adversaries, what are you seeing? What are you thinking about here?
Yeah, so I think, so part of our workflow, when we see these adversaries taking actions in our systems, excuse me, we effectively are delivering this as a managed service. So we don't just hand out our model weights. You get it through an API or through a chatbot interface. We are constantly looking at what is going in and out. And we don't retain a lot of this data, but we have ways of doing classifiers on it that tell us if something is up to shenanigans. And so anytime that we are putting out these intelligence reports, there's a process going on in the background where we have humans that are constantly using AI in defensive ways to examine what is going on in our system, make judgments about it, flag things for further study and retention. And pretty much any time you see somebody mentioned in an intelligence report that's coming out, that account, multiple accounts, multiple organizations have been identified, and we've basically already shut them down and booted them off our service. And we've taken all the intelligence that we learned that we're publishing publicly, and we've used it to create defensive things where it'll be much harder to take those actions on our platform again. And then we share those with both public and private sector partners because we believe in, basically a community defense. Like, we don't want us to, it's good for us to defend on our platform, but we never want like someone who is a commercial competitor to have a vulnerability that can be exploited by a bad actor. So, we talk to other entities in the world and we share this information with them. That is only happening with models that are provided as a service. So I think, right now, I think attackers are always going to take a path of least resistance. They're going to go for what gets the job done.
Yeah.
And I think that they're going to want the capabilities that the frontier labs and people providing frontier level models are providing. And like, this is adding reasoning and memory and all these other things to allow you to have a much longer, more structured use of AI to do whatever you're doing, for better or for worse. But we are constantly making it harder and harder for the adversaries that are trying to do this to do that. And so I think you're going to have this back and forth as the frontier models get more capable. They're going to be more desirable. But there's also a team of people and defensive AI that are constantly making it harder and harder for adversaries to do bad things. So our job as a responsible frontier lab and model provider is to balance that friction, because cybersecurity is a very challenging field. It's dual use. We never want to thwart defenders. We never want to stop you from being able to patch vulnerabilities and like improve your systems. But we do want to make sure that use of this for negative consequences for other organizations is something that happens very infrequently. So we're going to be in this balancing act. We're going to be constantly making it harder and harder for attackers to do bad things. I'm not coming from the research perspective as you guys of having sort of studied the criminal underground, just my point of view, but I think that there's going to be this back and forth. I think if there is a underground model that has all the capabilities, it's going to be greatly preferred by attackers. But I think the capabilities are always going to be better in a managed model delivered by a frontier lab than they are going to be in anything open weights.
Yeah, and I think that is something we have seen and reflected in some of the reviews, that actors will leave in these marketplaces where they say, okay, it's great that this doesn't have the same level of safeguards around here, and maybe if I try to create a DDoS tool, it doesn't prevent me from not being able to do that, but it doesn't have the same capabilities as some of these more well-known models. So I think it's an interesting kind of question as to, and again, the space is changing so rapidly, as you know, like in a year, 5 years' time, are we going to see enough capability in these models that don't have the safeguards, that will take up a lion's share of the adversary usage? I guess we could also talk about even some of the open source models where, maybe there's kind of like a middle ground there. So I think it's an interesting question about where will the adversaries gravitate to.
Yeah, I think like a lot of things in the space, it's going to be evolving over time. But I think in a way that's that to me is almost a plug for a model where you have people paying attention and you have people that are constantly monitoring the use of this. Because I do think like what is working as a defense right now is not going to be the same thing that'll work 6 months from now. It's definitely going to be not the same thing that works 12 months from now. And you have to constantly be evolving the defensive setup you have around model usage.
Well, let's shift into the defensive side then. So, of course, for anyone who's ever been to like a Google talk about security in the last several years, we've talked about AI and its usage and application to the defender side. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing that you are most excited about? Again, we've seen some adoption now by adversaries. We have a sense of, at least right now, where those use cases fall in. I think kind of similarly with the defender side, we have some of the early use cases of where AI is maybe more useful. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you're excited about?
Yeah, I think, so I've been doing defensive security for quite a while. And it always seems to be set up as a losing game just from a research perspective. Like defenders always have to prioritize defending certain things and not others because you never have the resources to do what you need to do. And this is almost always from a human perspective. Like you might have the money, you might have the computers, but you never have the staff and the skill to be able to close all the defensive holes. And so I will get into some specifics, but broadly, what if that's not the case anymore? Like we've been playing this losing game for so long. What if we actually have a situation where we now have a technology that can scale these things that we just never could do before? Does that change a defensive game where you can patch all the vulnerabilities, or most of the vulnerabilities, you can fix most of the misconfigurations? I mean, I think the thing I'm most excited about, which is strange for a detection response person, though, is the vulnerability management piece, just because that exists now. Like, that's not in question. That is something which is proven and works, and it's just a matter of people taking the resources and applying them. But specifically, my team, there's been a lot of talk about like AI as a SOC, et cetera. I think there's a ton of defensive work that can be done on the dynamic detection response side where, again, you're normally human limited. You normally have sort of a SOC where people are not necessarily the happiest about their jobs because you haven't written your detections to be as clean as they could be. And a lot of this just kind of gets dumped on people and do a lot of work and toil. Anywhere that you can reduce toil and you can scale humans, I think is going to be a good defensive use of AI. My team personally uses it for triage, and it's not like we ever run out of work, but we have all these triage and enrichment functions, which in the past can be done by automation, but you have to map out so many paths and so many potentials. And instead we found we're not even specifically trying to replace a SOC staff. We're putting Claude in a place where Claude can actually make decisions, and sometimes it does innovative things that just blow our mind. So anywhere that you can take stuff where humans are buried in toil, they're having to do a lot of work, and they're having to constantly keep on a defensive thing, excites me. But short term, I think vulnerability management, because we already have this proof of the fact that that can work, and it's just a matter of applying resources to scale it.
Yeah.
So
we were talking a little bit before the session began, a little bit about sort of the double-edged sword around this component of vulnerability management. And we were talking about this in the context of Big Sleep and being able to find vulnerabilities. And you can imagine having the capabilities built into the AI agents that we utilize to find this and to make the software that we use more secure is an advantageous thing. But you can also imagine a fork that we make, as an industry, where we say, because we're so concerned about it being used for exploitation, that we sort of neuter that capability altogether. And so maybe kind of thinking about this sort of the double-edged sword here of we want these capabilities to find these threats faster, but then we also have to think about, as they get built into tools that potentially could be misused by adversaries, how that looks. So maybe a little bit more about that just in the context of vulnerability management.
Yeah. So, so you mentioned Big Sleep. I also will bring up Google and Anthropic and multiple other labs participated in the DARPA Cyber Challenge over the past 2.5 years. The reason I'm going to bring that up is it's illustrated a point. So not to spend too much time on it, but the challenge was, can you make an autonomous system that will find and patch vulnerabilities? This is a very short version. And the answer is yes. Multiple people were able to do this, and the code is now available open source. So you can take the code and do this yourself, for better or for worse. And just the resources around it, there are a lot of really smart people participate in a lot of really good organizations, but the net cost in the actual contest was mind-blowing. To find and patch a vulnerability and also do some reporting and basically other things to fulfill the terms of the contest. The resource expenditure was under $500 per vulnerability. So how much does it cost to have somebody in your organization do vulnerability research? So you have this powerful thing, and I will come back to your point. You have this powerful thing now that exists. It's real. Like we saw it, the code was released at DEF CON this year. You can use that right now. And so I think there's a couple of things here. It's defenders have to start adopting this. We've definitely seen adversaries and offense be the first mover here. And I think there's a lot of people who are I don't know, this is weird. I don't understand this technology. It's not deterministic in the ways that I normally expect technology to be. It doesn't work. So I think a lot of defensive organizations have sort of slow-rolled adopting it. And so I think the biggest thing about how we're going to handle dual use as tool fold is defenders have to actively be engaging to get this leverage that attackers could have right now. Because again, a lot of what we have is because we've accepted the status quo of how software is written and how software is deployed and how systems are built. And we're just we could fix this if we had enough humans to go back and patch all the things, do all the problems. So we have this scale of defense now that was never possible. And again, vulnerabilities, it's proved it works. You just need to basically take the code, spend some time on compute, and somebody could be out there patching every open source library on the internet, which is actually one of the initial goals of the DARPA project. The other thing I think gets back to something I touched on earlier, which is I think you have to have all the safeguards and alignment that we have on models, but you have to actively be updating that over time. Because I think it is going to evolve. I think, again, like the controls we have right now that prevent people from doing hostile things are going to change. But we don't want to make it so that you can't do a defensive action that is going to really benefit your org because we're trying to prevent an offensive thing. So I think that's another case as to why the rollout of these has to be managed. You have to have people and AI systems constantly evaluating what the defenses are and are we making the right trade-offs. And those trade-offs are going to keep changing over time. So
that's a really good point. Maybe another area of security that's already been brought up at this conference, identity. And maybe I'll ask you this in kind of two different contexts. One, security use cases of using AI to deal with these attacks on identity that we're seeing. For anyone that was at Andrew's talk yesterday, I mean, he went through kind of a lot of different examples where we're seeing this with phishing, the stolen credential problem, info stealers. But identity being leveraged again and again in these intrusions. Any security use cases that you think can help better secure that problem? And then also I want to touch a little bit on sort of the agentic AI problem of like how we think about identity when we're now in a world of agents and what that looks like.
Yeah. So for the first one, this is kind of a bland answer, but again, I think it's anywhere where humans can be gathering and processing and figuring things out from information that could be sped up is going to be the case. Now, I'm not one of those people that believes LLMs are panacea. There's a lot of cases, especially where you have very large data sets where people are like, I can't use it here. LLMs are not the answer when you're trying to go through like millions of rows of logs and things like that in the way that like classic machine learning and other algorithms are. But you can have the AI system sort of sit there in where the human operator seat would be and be able to use the tools that look at the data at scale much faster. That's kind of one of the things that my team does defensively currently. So like, I think identity, and pardon me if I'm stealing somebody's catchphrase here, but identity has sort of been like the new attack plane in the modern internet is identity. Like that's where everything is happening now. Everything has become as a service, everything is in the cloud. And so a lot of this has just been abstracted out to the identity layer. And if you get someone's identity or some entity's identity, you can just do tons of damage taking actions on their behalf. So I'm going to jump into the second half, and then we can go back to the first half if I haven't really covered things there enough, because I did some hand waving around it, because I don't have like a magic bullet of like AI solves this identity problem. With agentic stuff, it's honestly going to make things more complicated, and this is for better or for worse. So, and this is something that we're examining right now and constantly trying to figure out how to improve in this space, because we're starting to get this idea of what we call a virtual collaborator. And so, Pew's like, hey, I can ask a chatbot a question, it'll give me an answer. And then I can have it do a coding task. One of the things that we and other entities are trying to build is we're trying to build something where you can ask a question and the agent will go off and do several hours of work for you unsupervised, and it'll come back and you'll be like, you did what I wanted. This is great. And that is becoming more and more of a reality every day. Like we have a lot of case studies where you can ask Claude to do something and like a coding project, and it will work for several hours and come back, and it will be code you want to keep. It'll be changes that you want to keep, things like that. Assume this progresses forward with innovations in the supporting technology and obviously innovations in the models. You end up with this agentic thing. So in classic security, we sort of think of identity two ways. There's people and there's systems, and in some cases there's computers. Computers can have identity and some identity systems as well. But like humans have certain types of behavior, like they show up at an office and they leave an office and they work certain hours a day and they sleep certain hours a day. And a detection response team, a lot of your detection patterns are based around how humans work and how humans don't work. And you look for cases where a human suddenly is in the wrong location or is working at the different hours or all this other stuff. System accounts are sort of the flip side of that. Like these are the machines, they make thousands of requests per second and they scale incredibly, but they work nonstop on a really regular basis and they have a set of permissions and they just don't act like a human. Agentic identities and virtual collaborators don't fit into either bucket. And if your security paradigm is based off of, well, I know my humans, I know my system accounts, and I know my computers, I know how they behave. Guess what? That whole thing just got thrown in a cocked hat because if you look at it from the human point of view, and I think this is the model you're going to most see, a virtual collaborator could be given an account like a human. It can be given an identity account. It could be given an email account. It could be given like some sort of chat platform of your favor account, and it can act and interact with humans like another coworker would. But the scale at which it's going to consume resources, the speed at which it's going to complete tasks, like reading and accessing documents. Like we've had plenty of detections that were human-based in terms of how people access documents. We just had to throw out the window. So it doesn't fit into the human bucket. It could be shaped like a human on your network and doing things, but the way it's going to act is going to be much more like a system account for speed. Or you could give it permissions like a system account over here, but then it's going to do things that, system account is always reading the same thing every day. You look for the anomalies because the system account suddenly got used for something different. Agents can decide to take a different path from A to B depending on just how they happen to process things. So I could say, hey, could you give me information about this particular threat actor? And on Monday, my agent could access 3 systems and read 5 documents and pull the information together. On Tuesday, it could use some different systems, different documents, and access the internet. And on Wednesday, it'll take a different permutation. So there's no guarantee it's always going to follow the same path. So we have this new paradigm in identity that is coming about with these agentic workflows that I think is going to not fit into any of the existing buckets that we have. And we have to figure out how to solve that. So I think that's an additional challenge that is coming up that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And I think that's going to be one of the most important things that the internet, and by that I mean the contributors to the internet, the tech companies, the people creating these, the people deploying these, the people building standards, we're all going to have to figure that out in the near future, is what this agentic identity means. And I think it's one of those things, again, for good or for evil, for really great productivity or abuse. Right now, somebody can get your credentials, they can do identity theft and fraud and all this other stuff. In the future, you're going to intentionally be giving your identity to an agent because you want it to do stuff on your behalf. There are going to be people who could, do their fraud via agents too. So I'll steal your identity or agent's identity, I'll give it to my fraud agent, it will run around. So this is not necessarily inspiring, but the whole thing is potentially about to get a lot more complicated in that space. Because I think we've already agreed that identity is the key linchpin to defending an organization right now and making sure your identities don't get exploited. Those identities are all about to get a lot more complex. So
I think that's an excellent series of points that I would agree. I don't think we spent enough time talking about today, and the sort of what the new normal will look like if, again, you're in the detection and response business part of cybersecurity, and what looked like normal several years ago is now no longer going to be the case. And I also wonder how much of that is going to change the crown jewels or the attack surface within an environment, in the same way that, for a lot of ransomware or destructive actors going for something like group policy object as a way to kind of rapidly disseminate ransomware, wiper malware through an environment, that becomes part of the process. Do we see agents themselves increasingly be targeted, or MCP servers that are used to orchestrate these? Do those become a more central part in the adversary's operation, either to destabilize some of the security controls or to carry out malicious actions?
I think they do, but interestingly, I think if we, and by we I don't necessarily mean Anthropic, I mean the collective people who are trying to solve this problem, can come up with a way to solidly communicate agentic identity, it actually will become something you could solve at scale. So the worst case is you have these agents running around doing all these various things. You have no insight and no control over them. So one of the things that my team has done, so a year or so ago, there was sort of a division between what the product org did and what the people doing the sort of observation of the agents, or what become the agents did and what my team did in terms of telemetry. Those lines have started blurring, and now we're actively collapsing them, because if we can get telemetry from the agent actions, i.e., hey, Claude, can you do this? Can you plan my shopping list is very different than can you break into this file store and exfiltrate this data. You can start getting sentiment analysis. And so trying to get telemetry as to why an agent system was launched and what the agent is doing in addition to the agent's actions, gives you a much richer data set. So we have gone from playing around with to believing it is mandatory that we have to have the context of why the agent is doing things. And part of that is its identity. So in the future, I can see a world where, and don't quote me on we're very actively involved in MCP, but this is not a product feature I'm saying is coming out or anything like that. But I could see in the future you have MCP servers or other ways of doing stuff where you have a logging standard. You have an agreed upon thing of, if this is a legitimate agent that is doing a good thing, it will log these things and it will provide these assertions around this identity when it does a thing. And once you've sort of set up these responsible citizen ideas, like you could be within your rights to be like, and if you're not giving that, then maybe you are suspect, and maybe I'm not sure what you're doing. So right now we have gone from just getting all the logs and trying to make detections on all the classic logs of systems to wanting to get the logs of what the agents are doing, what the identity of the agent is, and we're starting to have to correlate all that together for our detection picture. And without that, we would be sunk, but with that, we actually get a much richer picture of what is happening on our network and how we're able to determine if an agent is up to no good or if it is doing the right thing. And again, I'm not sure if I actually answered your question there, sorry.
I think it was in there.
Yeah, okay.
So we've gotten a little bit into the actual like weeds and the nuts and bolts of sort of what this could look like in the future, some of the challenges we will have for offense and defense. Maybe zooming out a little bit, we've talked about offense, we've talked about defense use case. How do you see the overall balance of power between adversary and defender changing? Because I think we have to talk about these not just sort of in their kind of discrete categories, but it seems like a lot of what we're seeing are attempts to increase efficiency on both sides of the equation. And that, of course, can translate into speed. And there's, I think, the point you made earlier about like this is partially why the defenders have to adopt these tools so we can be faster than the adversary. But any thoughts kind of overall of like how this is changing the balance of power?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to shift the balance of power to whatever side pays the most attention and adopts things in a practical manner the fastest. You can't just sprinkle AI magic on it and have it work. You have to be thoughtful about your applications of it. But I think if you sort of decide I'm sitting on this one out, you are going to... I think whoever adopts this the fastest is whoever is going to have the most power in the situation. I think attackers have gotten a little bit ahead, but I think the breadth at which defenders could leverage this could completely change that game. But yeah, I think it's going to be whoever actually leans in and spends the most time adopting this. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had another point. I'm losing it.
No worries. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can include in here, but I think kind of rounding out, coming to the home stretch of this, as you look ahead, and much of what we've talked about has not been just sort of current state, but kind of going forward in the future, what we can expect. When you look around the sort of landscape, again, it could be either on the defender or adversary side. What are some of the things that, for people kind of following along with trends in this very fast-moving industry, you think are the most important things to be monitoring? Some of the most sort of like key innovations that would be signposts of how this overall relationship between AI usage by defenders and adversaries is changing. What are some of the sort of outlooks that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see, I think, again, not just us, multiple people in the industry have pointed towards the fact that there is potentially a vulnerability storm coming at some point, signaled with the results of this, the work that you all have done and the work that the Cyber Challenge has done. There have been a lot of people that are sort of like, someone needs to get on this. And so I think what you're going to see is you're going to see sometime in the next 6 months, you're going to see a dramatic shift in the number of vulnerabilities that are either being fixed or exploited, depending on who is spending time on solving that problem. And I think that will hopefully we will see it on the defender side. But if we don't, I think that's going to prove a huge wake-up call that a lot of these other predictions are things that are happening. I think you're going to see real challenges around agentic identity. And I think, again, solving those is going to be an incredible boon for defenders. But I think you're going to have cases where if people are trying to just like sprinkle some AI on it and they start unleashing things in their enterprise without conscious decision and implementation choices, they're effectively going to create their own risks from how they've deployed it. So I think that's another thing that you're going to see, which is showing that agentic stuff is having an impact. And I think just generally the big problem here is this is going to come at everyone a lot faster than you think. A lot of people who are in my seat are sometimes accused of like, you're hyping this because, this is something that like promotes and moves business forward. A lot of times it's actually, no, we're sort of warning this because we want people to pay attention and act. So I think a lot of this stuff is going to come forward a lot faster than people think it is going to come forward. And I think that, you should be on the lookout for ways that you can leverage this in your enterprises, and you can figure out ways to improve defensive posture doing this, and then you should share them back with the community wherever possible. So I think what I would like to see is I would like to see the benefits of the research that has been done by multiple entities, Google and ourselves included, on how to patch vulnerabilities being used to patch stuff at scale, because it's now very cheap to do so. And I think responsible organizations with budget and resources should be able to do this without humans now, and be able to be presenting, imagine if you just woke up one day and there was a pull request for every vulnerability in your open source project. That would be pretty cool. Trying to think of a few other things. Yeah, I think just the advances in agentic stuff is going to be the big thing for the next year. I think properly deploying agents within your enterprise, thinking about how you're going to track their identity and thinking about how you're going to track their behaviors is going to be key to success, because if you can leverage them for good, you're suddenly going to be able to scale in a way that you haven't been able to before. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you don't do it with the right safeguards and intentionality, you're potentially creating your own internal insider risk from how you're deploying it.
We're already starting to see, obviously, for the last several years, organizations that have maybe launched pilot programs with adoption of AI outside the security use case. And as they kind of, increase that sort of muscle memory and comfortability with this technology, do you think that that's going to be something also, as an attack surface, or just like it's now a more integral part of most enterprises? That's something that we are going to see maybe accelerate that overall adoption in the security side of use cases?
You're saying that the implementation of more AI is going to accelerate security use cases to defend it, or security use cases for...
Just overall, with the larger enterprise, for maybe kind of a business reason, adopting AI now is going to put maybe more pressure on CISOs and others that maybe had been more reticent in the past, but now they're thinking, well, we're already using this. We need to be thinking, how do we use this for sort of security use cases more so?
I would like to see that. I don't know that I'm optimistic about that. I think it would be great. I think that if anytime you're, so this has been recognized, like a lot of major cybersecurity companies out there have sort of been calling out that this stuff is happening and concerns in this area. I think anytime you're deploying a new technology, you need to be making a risk decision. And I think that this is happening so quickly, a lot of companies are not necessarily thinking through that. So I would love it to be that every company that is going to view this as a way to innovate and accelerate their business processes is also going to look at this as a way to innovate and improve their security processes. But yeah, I expect there's a lot of companies that are not going to think through that. But I mean, that's not an AI problem. That's a classic security problem. Right. Of security is only recognized when you're doing it right. It's invisible when you're doing it right. It's only recognized when you're doing it wrong. So I think it's just, that's another thing where things are going faster. It's going to exacerbate it. I don't think there's a direct correlation, but I would love to see a company being like, we're going to innovate through AI and make our business stronger, and we're also going to apply that to our security program.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to end this on an optimistic note, which is so hard in any sort of security context. Yeah. But I think it's a well-made point. I think we have a couple minutes left for maybe a question or two.
I can riff on the one thing from an optimistic standpoint. Well, something we didn't cover in terms of just, this is not a security specific thing, but I've seen a lot of cases where people are like, use AI. And I just want to talk about the pattern we've seen, which seems to be successful, is if an executive comes in top down and says, use AI, and that's it, it is not usually successful. What we see is when you have the people from the bottom up who want to experiment and innovate in an organization are given license to not replace everything with AI, but attempt to use it to solve a problem for an extended period of time, and there is executive support for that, people constantly amaze themselves. And I have seen so many people converted, including myself, from being skeptics of, there are flaws, we're moving too quickly, all this other stuff. If people get the support to take it and try and solve specific problems, and they do it for like a month or so, they suddenly get it. And then they become people who are like, I'm going to try applying this here, I'm going to try applying this here. The places we've seen the best success are places where you have a bottom-up push, but with executive support to do that, with the protection in the space to try and see. Because a few really creative people in your organization can just create really amazing systems and things. And I think this is the true democratization that's going to happen over time is between what you can do with coding and what we're learning to do with this in security, you're going to be able to start building new systems in place that normally you would have been like, well, it's another resource constraint thing. Like I couldn't do this because I'd either have to spend millions of dollars getting a vendor in or I'd have to hire a team of 10 engineers. You're going to be able to start filling in some of those gaps with systems and processes you build, which are done in a little bit of time with a little bit of resources compared to like a normal enterprise security budget. So I think encouraging people to experiment with this and seeing what they can solve and executives giving cover to do that. We have this as a problem at Anthropic, not necessarily a security, but just in general, is we encourage people to experiment all the time, and we have a backlog of projects that have been successful that we just can't keep up with because so many people are finding ways to do something new that saves time, saves energy, makes things more secure, makes things a smoother user experience. So hopefully that is an optimistic take on it.
No, definitely. And we saw something similar. We did a hackathon within some of our security teams a couple of years ago. And it was interesting to see because it was really from kind of bottom-up use cases of people in their day-to-day workflow saying, this is where it makes the most sense for what I'm doing to apply AI. And I think we'll probably see, there's certainly whole categories of security where I think like vulnerability management, everyone kind of sees the promise of application of AI, but I think there's going to be a lot of like more niche use cases that are sometimes organization and sub-teams within that this has been the pain point that I've always had and that AI can kind of fix. And those are going to be proven out by those individuals adopting it. So. Fantastic. Well, great optimistic note to end on, which is always great to do in a security talk. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Doug and